Good people, check it out. We've got the author today of Tonechaser here, Steve Rosen. For those that don't know, this is just an amazing, amazing read. It's such a wonderful thing that you've put together. So anyway, welcome to Sunday Live.
Thank you so much, Pete. This is really very cool for me. It's funny, man, because I'd actually reached out to you sort of, a little while ago. I was trying to track you down. I thought, well, I know this Pete Thorn guy is an unbelievable guitar player, and he's pretty big Van Halen fan, and I kept reaching out and just, I get it, busy or not seeing stuff, and then we had the great good luck to see each other at the NAMM show this past January, and had a chance to say hello to you, and I realized you had your wonderful podcast here, so I reached out to you and we put together this date. So it's just amazing to be here, man. You are one of the true leading, your dives into what Edward did, and your dissection of his tones and stuff. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. How much somebody like Edward would touch somebody like you, and I've tried to figure out, well, what is it? What is it about Edward Van Halen that Pete Thorn loves so much? And look, I get the obvious things. He had these techniques and his tapping, but why do we love him so much? Why do so many people such as yourself take such deep, incredible dives into what he does? I mean, it's kind of a rare thing. I mean, right, there's some great guitar players in this world, but you don't see like tons of guys kind of diving down to find out, well, what kind of amp was Page using on that first Zeppelin record? You know what I mean? But Edward seems to bring this out in guitar players. So, and I suppose I tried to address that in the book. What was it about Edward that so attracted people? What was it about him that touched people? And I think from spending some time with him that what you feel about Edward goes, look, I don't want to put thoughts in your head, but it goes beyond just, the fact that he was using Marshall heads and his own strats. I think there was something internally to him that touches you in some way,
Well,
right?
To that, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I've been thinking about my answer to your question, and what is it? And I think it's very simply the way that he made people that he touched, that he reached. There was a consistent thing, and it's the way that he made us feel. And people don't like, I heard Noel Gallagher say a while ago, and I thought it was like pretty astute. He said, people never forget the way that you make them feel. And Eddie made us feel something through his guitar playing and his music. He spoke through the guitar. I mean, you've spent a lot of time with him. The interviews are fantastic, and we'll get into that and stuff. But it's like, that he was most articulate speaking through the guitar, I think. I mean, he's a great guy to speak with, but his feel, it was this intangible, like, what is it, like you say, but where did it come from? It's like this magic thing that he just tuned into, and he made us feel something with his touch and his tone and his songwriting and like when you think about something like Little Guitars, let's say, right? I mean, that whole amazing intro that happens, and then we get into the electric part. It kicks into that groove, and there's that, and it's kind of a slow burn, and then we get into, and you're going like this, and then he's in the next part, which is almost like fusion or something, but we don't perceive it that way because he spoke so clearly with it. That it's, I mean, fusion, like it's muso, but it's not. He had this ability to just take us on this ride that made us feel, it feels like you're driving through, with the wind in your hair and going like 70 miles an hour on by the sea or something. Listen to that song. How do you do that? Like a sound, but that's what he could do.
Yeah, man, that's a really interesting way to frame that, Pete. And again, I tried to understand it and write about it in the book, and I'm sure that you've thought about it. All those things that you mentioned about Little Guitars, I don't think for a second that was consciously going through his head. Right. Oh, it's going to have this intro, right? It's going to, and then it's going to, go into that, for want of a better description, prog thing there. You know, I don't think he sensed it. Or oh, I want to take people on this, you know, the sonic trip. You know, it's gonna like they're, you know, flying or something. He never thought like that. You know, it was this unconscious or subliminal, subconscious thing that he did, and I think that's what made everything he did so
yeah.
organic.
And yet, you know, you've sat with him and talked with him about music, and about, you know, extensively about the guitar. And I mean, I had the good fortune. You've spent so much more time with him than I ever got to, but I did have the good fortune to spend some time with him and sit there, and, you know, at the console in 5150, he's like playing me something, and I'll never forget him playing this song and the way he would talk about music. But there's videos of this, of course, when he's playing like an early version in 5150 of Amsterdam, and it's around like 1985, and he's playing the riff on a Charvel guitar that we've never seen before or since, you know. It's like, and he's sitting there playing it, and then it goes like this, and then it's going to go here. And he's like, he's so into it. And when I sat there right in that same spot with him, and he was playing me something, he was describing the drums. He's like, yeah, it's like, does this. And he's like playing air drumming. And then he goes, and then it's going to go here. Check this out. And then I go into the solo and check this out. It's like one long note. And he was holding this note and like milking one note on this track. We've never heard this track since. I don't know what. You know, it was this amazing moment that felt like something out of a dream. And I know you're related because when you speak about these things on the audiobook that is companion to your book, you speak about it and your feelings in the same way that I think that I felt, you know, sitting there and listening. You're just like, God, is this really like, you just want to like be present and soak it up because it was so cool.
Right. You know, that's really interesting, Pete. So I guess really what I'm trying to describe here is that dichotomy. He was an extraordinary songwriter, right? He understood, you know, harmonically what he was doing and all that stuff, you know. And I think we talked about it a little bit in the book. You know, he would talk about what he heard the drums doing, or what he might have heard the bass doing, you know, as he was coming up with this. So he was aware of that. I think it came more from a
feeling.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I think he was aware of like he knew I think he was pleasing himself. Like he was a great, you know, he was most happy, I think, as a songwriter, when he was pleasing, you know, like getting his vision out, and he's like, yeah, it's going to do this, and then it's going to do this. And it was like, but he wasn't aware of like, oh, I'm trying to take people on this ride. He was like trying to take himself on this journey, you know, which is the true art. I mean, like when a songwriter is really tuned into their own thing, and when they make themselves happy, that's, to me, that's art. You know, any artist when they, I think, you know.
No, that's a perfect way to put it. You know, that's that dichotomy. Yeah, it was always about him. He never thought about the audience. I mean, look, he knew he wasn't playing for country and Western fans, or, you know, classical music fans. But yet, no, you're right. And if he was pleased with it, he let it out into the world.
And then you get that little insight into, you go on this guy's journey. It's so fantastic. But
exactly.
Yeah. So I've got a few things, like sort of just specifics that I was going to ask you about. But I also kind of want to keep it. Sometimes when I have guests, I feel like my show is often me just answering questions from folks in the chat. And that's kind of what a lot of people come here for, and I think that's great. So I want to make sure that I mostly leave it open for folks in the chat to ask you questions about, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that have already got the book and have listened to the audiobook. Which, by the way, for folks out there, if you get a copy of this, you got to check out the audio, because there's a lot of companion, you know, interviews and things, and some of the most magical stuff is Ed and you sitting with guitars playing unamplified. So I'll go to that right away, and if you get the book, just make sure you listen to the audiobook as well. But the unamplified stuff of you sitting there with him is the greatest guitar lessons, because you can really hear when people talk about tone in the hands. There it is. It's like the articulation, the attack, and the intention is all there with just you with a little cassette recorder and him playing. You know, he's playing your Strat sometimes, or he's got the Bumblebee guitar, and you're spelling that out for us and painting a picture of what that looked like and was like. Man, like, can you just speak to that a little bit? Like that sitting there and getting that, like that firsthand glimpse.
It was remarkable. And look, you know, in those early interviews, you know, and Ed would come over to the pad, you know, and again, I lived pretty close to him. Edward was, in Coldwater Canyon, you know, and I was in Laurel Canyon. And there's a street called Mulholland, which is a pretty famous street that, you know, kind of winds around at the very top of the hill, and was just, you know, you kind of zoom down Mulholland and we could, you know, be at each other's houses. So, you know, we were pretty close, living pretty close to each other. And I remember that, you know, the first time he came over, I mean, you know, a lot of guys, a lot of guitar players, the last thing they want to do is, you know, pick up a guitar. And I wasn't about to say, Ed, pick up the guitar and play some stuff. Yeah, I wasn't going to do it right, you know. And I even write about it in the book because, you know, me and my, you know, 10 thumb hands, you know, I mean, I play guitar, and I always had a couple of guitars, you know, there in the front room. You know, in stands, and they were always theirs, you know. And I write about that. I go, does this look too staged? Is he going to like see the guitars and think, oh, this Rosen guy, he plays guitar, he's going to want me, you know, all that stuff goes through my head, you know. Right. But literally the first thing he does is he goes over and he picks up the guitar. And again, I write about that pretty amazing scene. You know, the first thing he does is, hey man, can I take off the knob, you know? He's had the guitar in his hand for 2 minutes and he wants us to dismantle it. I said, do anything you want, you know. Yeah, and then there's you know, one of the amazing times is when he comes over before the second record comes out, and he plays me the tracks down in his car. Again, these aren't mixed, and again, it's hard for me to remember. I know there was no vocals. There may have been drums. I don't think there was even bass. So I was hearing all those tracks, I mean, pretty naked, you know, and it was just amazing to me. And then we go up in the house and he pulls his guitar and he starts showing me, well, this is what I did on, you know, this track and that track, you know, and it was instant. Look, just him going over to pick up the guitar and just watching, you know, we're sitting on the couch, and just the way that the guitar rested in his hands and kind of, you know, settled on his lap. I mean, it was a really beautiful thing to watch. I mean, I'm really not trying to wax poetic here, but it was really incredible. And then he starts playing, you know, says, oh, you have a pick? And of course, he never had a fucking guitar pick, right? So I kind of pick somewhere and give him some pick. And he starts playing, and yes, the thing you talk about, Pete, is instantly it's like, oh my God, that's Edward Van Halen, you know, and it's in his fingers and it's picking, you know. And I remember watching it, you know, because I'm sitting on the couch, you know, 2 feet away from him. I'm watching him play, and I think he played all that stuff on that interview where he's playing this stuff from the second record on my Strat. And again, I described the Strat, this 66 Strat. It was a pretty cool guitar, which I could never keep in tune. And when I played it, I sounded like horse shit, you know. And he picked it up, and just acoustically, it's like, oh my God, that's it, you know. Yeah. And you know, so he starts playing, and just a couple things that I really realized is that his right hand was really forceful, and I thought it would have been more of those. I don't know how to describe. Just a little lighter. You know, his attack would have been lighter, right? But what was pretty heavy was his left hand. You know, when he was doing chords and stuff, man, it was, you know, it wasn't kind of lightly resting on the neck. It was, you know, he was going for it. He was grabbing the neck, and it was just amazing. And I thought, oh my God, that's what everybody is hearing, you know. And it was just there. And I marveled at it, you know, and I tried not to turn into a total geek. And, you know, I recognized what it was, you know, that here's this guy. So that's so by the second record, I mean, his star is beginning to rise, right? They've already, the first album's come out, you know, they've gone out, they've done the tour on their own, and then the second record. So it was Edward Van Halen ascending. He wasn't quite the legend that he would soon become, but I realized sitting next to him, it's like, oh my God, man, you are seeing something that is so special, and do you know how lucky you are? And I recognized that immediately, you know, and I recount those moments, and you talk about it and wanting me to explain it. And, you know, I tried to tried to write about it, and tried to take a deep dive as much as I possibly could as a journalist,
Sure.
to describe what that was, and to describe, his attitude, and his playing, and he was so nonchalant about everything. It wasn't like,
Right.
I'm doing it, and it wasn't like he would concentrate or look at me like, are you listening? It was never anything like that, and he was never like that.
Yeah.
And in touching on the audiobook that you just mentioned, Pete. So when you hear this section in the audiobook, it really takes you sort of a stage deeper, because now you're hearing him play all those songs acoustically, right? And our interaction and me, responding to it, which is why I think the first audiobook is so amazing, because it's all of that audio in there that you're only reading the text in the book.
Yeah, I mean, you hear him tapping the intro to Women in Love. You hear him playing the solo, which I just, as soon as I heard it, I was like, the chills, when he does the solo to You're No Good. You hear the, the tapping run like right away, which I'm enamored with the one lick where he goes, and he does that little like drill with and it took me forever to get to that and go, oh shit, he's sliding with his right hand in this snaky way, and that you hear perfectly because it's unamplified. It's just the acoustic sound of the electric guitar on the couch, and it's like, this is gold. Like you can just hear it all, and there's that tone in the hands argument. What does that mean? And it's like, there it is. It's like you can really hear that he's so articulate. I love too, there was one moment around the same in the same interview where you talk about him playing so fast. You go, God, how do you like, are you playing through some certain patterns, or how are you? And then he rips this lick and it's just killer. And then he goes, I can't really play right now because I'm not really warmed up.
Exactly.
And he's like, and I know what that feels like, but when I do it, I really feel like I'm not, I am not warmed up. And it's like, I'll sit here sometimes when people will ask me about something, I'll pick up a guitar and then I'm like, okay, I can only like do this at this like tempo right now. And it's different. But when it's just so funny to me, he just plays this thing with perfect execution. Then he's like, I can't really play right now though, because I'm not warmed up.
Exactly. And so amazing, Pete, that you would hear him do the little, the run in the little lick in You're No Good, and it would kind of, open a door for you, as I'm sitting there. So if I put myself back there, he's playing these things. Never in a million years did I think that those little things that he was doing that I was listening to would be analyzed or listened to or repeated by guitar players like yourself, looking at that and going, oh my God, and a couple other amazing guitar players have mentioned, oh my God, him doing that is like this amazing guitar lesson. I mean, when I'm there in the moment, you just, I had no concept. One, I had no concept of what a podcast was.
Right, sure.
Thinking, right? I mean, the only reason I recorded those interviews was so I could go write a story.
To transcribe them. Yeah, sure.
Exactly, transcribe it. You never think that, had I don't know, had any vision, I talk about it, the piece of shit cassette player that I use and the cheap, Radio Shack microphone, but
it's better. It's like charming, I think. That makes it so real, because that's what's good. You could be in a studio with, proper SM7s and a deep, sounding, but it's like, it's so cool. It's just you guys hanging out at your house. I love it. So.
Exactly. And when you bring up like a moment like, oh, I'm not warmed up yet, to me, it took me 580 pages to try and explain who this person was. Just that little picture tells you everything you need to know about him.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean,
right?
Totally. He would say to me like, I just write riffs. Like I'm just a riff writer or whatever.
Yeah.
Like he'd be so dismissive about his like, like this kind of, well, I don't know. It's like, he was just had this thing. Like it's, I don't know. It was like, it was super endearing that, like, you know, I think he knew his impact and he felt the weight, but he also like was this at the core, like the super humble, like I remember George Lynch telling me about him. You know, he goes, that guy, because of course he knew him in the 70s and everything, and he'd see him. He goes, that guy, he goes, you could go over to his house or something. You'd be there at 10 o'clock sitting on the side of the bed working on something. You come back at like 5 p.m. He's still sitting there doing it. It's like when he was like a kid, you know, that's how he just, oh, I don't know, this is what I did. It was how he related to the world, I think. And he just found his thing. It was like so cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, he would. I mean, and all the time I spent with him, and I'm sure he never said it to you, like, oh, Pete, listen, this is the fucking greatest thing. Now, he might want you to listen, and, you know, he's playing these parts and it's playing drums, but it would never be like, oh my God, this is just the greatest riff, isn't it? Or, man, I can blow these other guys. He never thought like that at all. But on that other side, as you hinted at, Pete, he knew he was a very good guitar player.
Right.
Right. He knew that. Again, there's that dichotomy. I don't think he ever truly, maybe years later, maybe many years later, and, you know, he did that Smithsonian interview, and,
yeah,
you know, maybe he was sort of worried, but I really don't, at least when those early days, I don't think he had any sense of how he was changing guitar playing at all. You know,
I mean, I think he was like, I don't know, this is just my trip. And then when people started copying the Stripes and doing their own, you know, painting, you know, the guitar companies would put up things. He'd go, I'm just trying to do my own thing. Like, cause he had this thing, that he was that really pure artist where he just, this is my lane. And then, so that maybe bothered him. And he was aware when other people were jumping on the bandwagon and stuff, and then protective about his sound and all those aspects too. So, which was always, that's something else we could talk about. But I'm going to hit a question here from somebody in the chat. Fan of the Wild says, Mr. Rosen, thank you so much for being here and your efforts for the Van Halen fans. In your discussions with Eddie around Women and Children First, did he talk much about using Chris Holmes' Ibanez Destroyer? And I'm interested in that too. Did you ever talk about what happened to the Destroyer when he took the piece out of it with the chainsaw, and then he went and borrowed Chris's because he trying to get that sound back?
I know that he talked about he had an SG and he cut off one of the horns because he couldn't get up. I thought maybe he had mentioned talking about ruining the Destroyer. I don't think the name Chris Holmes ever came up, or what happened to guitar, or using Chris's guitar. You know, firstly, please call me Steve. I hate Mr. Rosen. God, that's like somebody I don't know. I never wanted to be that fucking dickhead. But you know, people ask these questions, you know, and you have these specific questions, and for all the time I spent with them and all the hours I recorded stuff, you know, I look back now and I think, and I write about this, about why didn't you talk to him more about that? Why didn't you ask him more about the Ibanez? Why didn't you ask him about Chris Holmes' guitar? And why didn't you ask him more about his family? You know, and it's like, I thought I was going to have all the time in the world. So just to back up a little bit here, and maybe some of your fans know this, Pete. So back in 1986, you know, 1984 records come out. Sammy has just joined the band. Van Halen is now monstrous band. Edward is a bona fide legend. I knew that writers were going to approach him wanting to write his life story.
Right.
And I thought, well, I want to be that person, you know? So, and again, I write about this. It literally took me months and months to build up the courage to ask him that, you know? I was afraid of two things. One, he was going to say no. And two, he was going to say yes, you know? So, you know, it's like if he said no, I said, okay, hey, you know, that would hurt, but hey, it's his life, it's his choice. If he said yes, and it's like, oh my God, now I've got to sit down and really write this thing. How do I do that? You know? So 1986, you know, he says, sure, you know, I can't think of anybody else to write the book. And, you know, that meant so much to me, of course. And so I start interviewing people, you know, friends and bandmates and guitar techs, all ostensibly what will be in this authorized biography of Edward Van Halen. I think I really worked on it, and I can see some of the dates. I mean, I was probably gathering interviews for 3 years, maybe 4 years. I mean, I spent a lot of time, and periodically, I say, Edward, we need to sit down and talk about the book, and not about the music so much, but more the personal stuff. Your family life, and back when you were, a little kid,
Yeah.
and growing up with Alex and your family, and his response was, well, I don't think the time is right now, because I'm working on a record, and this and that, and I mean, he was always going to be working on a record, right? He was always going to be busy, and I understood that, and I tried to push, you can only push so hard.
Yeah.
Then it's like, I'm wearing out the welcome.
Yes.
And, it's probably around, I don't know, probably around 90 or so. I just kind of, I let it go, and I realized it's never going to happen. But the whole point of my tirade here is, I thought I would have all the time in the world. I thought, oh, we're going to sit down again, and I will ask him about the destroyer, and I will get to talk to him about his family, and I will get to fill in those holes, and
sure,
all that stuff. And so I hear questions like that, and I go, oh God, yeah. What did people ask? Well, why didn't you ask him about Randy Rhoads? And it's just like one of those things. It's like, well, I'll have time to ask him about Randy Rhoads and all the other guitar players around our time. George Lynch and Rusty Anderson, who's in Paul McCartney's band. Rusty was an incredible guitar player.
I know Rusty well. Yeah, I've known Rusty
right.
For years.
Sure. Or all the other guitar players. I mean, we talked a little bit about, Clapton and Beck, but it's like I wanted to ask him so much more.
Yeah.
What about Leslie West and Paul Kossoff and Trower and
well, you did. I mean, you did. I mean, there's the great,
segment
in the book about Richie Blackmore and that whole experience. Yeah. But and you talked about Richie, and he actually sits there and plays purple riffs and stuff for you, or like
exactly.
And that's great. And then a little bit of Jeff Beck, and so there's some great moments.
I guess I look at it. I'm always my own worst critic, and it's like, yes, I wish I could have asked all those questions that everybody wanted to hear. The book would have been 1,000 pages long, but hey,
Yeah. Well, you are, and I'll say, to speak to that, you are. It comes off in the book that you're a I don't really know you, but it's like this just comes off to me. So forgive me for saying, but it's like you're sort of like a sensitive and empathetic guy, I think, and that's a compliment coming from me, I think, where you're really aware of people's feelings and not wanting to step on toes, and that's actually kind of the sort of personality maybe that why you probably ended up, I think, spending so much time with Ed, because I mean, I think that was required because he was a sensitive guy, I think, and that kind of just being aware, reading the room, knowing what I mean with him. I mean, I know the time I spent with him, it was always like a question of like, I never want to wear out my welcome, I never want to say the wrong thing, and I always just want to be respectful. And then when it's time for me to go, I'm going to actually get up and be the one to. I'm not going to have him say, "Hey, I you should go," or whatever. So I would always try and read the room a little bit, and then be like, you know what, I should leave you alone right now. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to go and let you do your thing. It's so good to see you, and then I get out of there.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, Pete, you get it. I mean, empathetic is a really good word. I think I was that person. I think I brought that to my work as a journalist. I was a good writer, at moments I was really good, and maybe occasionally I wrote something that was really, really good. But I really think what I had was an empathy and a respect for all of these musicians I was speaking with, and certainly with Edward. But, sitting there in a room with Jeff Beck, it's like, are you kidding? And David Gilmour, and it's like,
Yeah, you interviewed, for those that don't know, you interviewed everybody. I mean, everybody. If there's you literally, if you guys could ask, oh, what about this? Yep. Because I mean, for Guitar Player, Guitar World, long ongoing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I did. I was lucky, and I know we're jumping subjects here, but this is great. So in the 70s, when I first started writing, early 70s, probably about 72, I thought it was a little later, but I think I actually started getting a few things published in some decent publications around the mid 72.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that a lot of the bands that we love, that would go on to huge things, a lot of these bands were just releasing first albums.
Sure. Eddie.
I mean, ZZ Top and Aerosmith and
Yeah.
and nobody knew who Aerosmith was. I mean, I saw them at the Whiskey, and there were 200 people there, maybe.
What was that like?
That was unbelievable. Look, we're being totally transparent here. I was never a big Aerosmith fan from that first record.
Okay.
To me, it sounded like a distilled version of the Yardbirds, maybe meet the Stones a little bit. I didn't think they were great. I thought Dream On was a great song. That was an amazing song. And obviously that was the hit from the record, or the single that did something. And all the rest of those covers, it's like, you can't write your own stuff, so you put covers on your first record. That's me. Look, the Beatles did it too. So
it was a standard practice, right? I mean, it was a producer thing, I think, too. Ted Templeman even, like, finding You're No Good for, hey, what do you guys think if we do a cover? It's like you talk about that. Ted brought it to the band, right?
You're right. Right.
And so I think that was the standard practice. Was Ted being an A&R guy? He was he was like, go and find. It's got to be about the songs.
Yeah. You're right. So so I interviewed. I think all 5 of the guys were there at the Continental Hyatt House, which is a famous hotel on Sunset Boulevard, dubbed the Riot House, because they welcomed all the bands.
Yeah.
Other hotels didn't want bands because they would trash the rooms, and they said, well, just pay for what the damage you do. And so there's those famous stories, right, of the Who there and Keith Moon tossing televisions out of windows and Zeppelin and groupies and drugs, and it was all true, man. They were fun days, So Aerosmith, so I interviewed them, and it was right before the second record came out, and they were a little upset that the first record really hadn't done much. And then the second record comes out, they start flexing their wings, as it were, as songwriters. And I started realizing, oh my God, these guys really are good songwriters, And I recognized, what a great guitar player in his own fashion Joe Perry was, and he sort of had sucked in all of that Jimmy Page, that sloppy thing, and what a wonderful writer he was. So yeah, man, it was an amazing time to be a journalist. All the magazines needed freelance writers. They couldn't handle all the stuff in-house. So yeah, it was like a guitar player, or a session guy, well, if I do a session with this guy and that's on my resume, I'm going to get calls. Well, you kind of do some stuff for this magazine, and other magazines see it, and hey, I've done a couple of things for Guitar Player magazine, Cream, Circus, musician. Do you guys need stories? So it was an amazing time. And for some reason, nobody was interviewing any of these guys. It's like, Jeff Beck. I think some of those interviews I did early on, Joe Walsh, John McLaughlin, John Entwistle.
Yeah. And you're like literally like, are you like 20 years old at this point, right? Like, I mean, this is mid 70s.
Exactly. Yeah. I was 20 or 21.
Unbelievable.
It was, it was unbelievable. And I say this, and part of it's jest, part of it's true. I would have done it for free.
Yeah,
sure. You're gonna let me sit in a room with Peter Frampton, and you're gonna give me tickets to his show and send me his album. Where do I sign? It was really a magical time. So pretty amazing.
So cool, man.
And just to one of your points, Pete. Yes, I have interviewed just about every pretty major guitar player from the 70s and 80s, and I've talked about this so many times. The one that got away that I literally tried for 20 years to corner was Clapton.
Oh.
Never interviewed Clapton. You know, he was always, you know, well, he's doing, you know, one interview cover of Rolling Stone, or he's talking with the LA Times, or no, he's busy, or no, you know.
It was also pretty dark time for him. I mean, I think maybe the mid-70s was kind of
Yeah. You're right. No,
out a little bit, maybe, you know,
exactly.
but it's so amazing. So you guys, I mean, everybody watching, I mean, if you got any questions about, if you're like, well, I got a Jeff Beck question, or, you know, this is very Ed-centric because we're talking about Tonechaser here, and it's always Ed-centric on my show, by the way, as you know, probably, but but
yeah,
but
anything
else,
about anything.
But right now, let's see. Ryan Casey's got a question. He says, thanks for putting this together. Thanks, Steve. Have either of you ever played the OG Frankenstein guitar? I've heard it was heavy, like Les Paul heavy. I've always been curious. I personally, just me, I mean, I was over there one day and I did some photos at 5150, and I was handed a guitar. And I'm pretty sure it was one of those 2007 Frankenstein copies that you know, that they did. They're very expensive now. They're $25,000 or something. But I just didn't even ask, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to believe it was the real one. So I just believed it's the real one. I just make believe. But I'll say that. So that was the only time that I ever was there and picked up a guitar that looked like that. That probably wasn't, but I remember clearly being there, for instance, and seeing the 5150 guitar on the wall, the Kramer.
Yeah,
of course, became his main guitar for so long. Just, you know, in passing, you were walking by, and you walk by, and you're like, oh, damn it, and you're walking by into the other room. I just want to. Can I just? But I never would be like, can I pick that up for a minute? He probably would have been like, of course, like, just,
yeah, exactly.
But he did show me as well. The one thing that was amazing, because it related to why I was there and stuff. But he's like, this is the Ripley guitar, you know, and handed it to me like this. And I was like, and I'm just like, Top Jimmy, you know, it's the Ripley. So cool. And, you know, and I had seen photos of it, of course, and whatnot, and all the pan pots and everything for the Bartolini up and all that. But it was just, oh man, so cool. But anyway, so did you, I know you played the Bumblebee because we hear that on the recordings, but did you play? I'm sorry, I haven't gotten to that. If you mention it in the book, I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Did you play
yeah. So I played the Bumblebee, and there's a famous shot of me with Edward on the Day of the Green on the back cover of the first and second books, where I'm playing the black and whites.
That version of it, yeah, that version.
Yeah, you've got the third edition, Pete. I think it's on the second edition. Is the black and white photo, or the first edition is the black and white, and the second edition, I think, is the color version of that.
I think I used it as a thumbnail, the photo you're speaking of, for this video. So where you're with Ed and he's got the guitar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm playing that guitar. I was up at 5150, and again, like you, I mean, on any given day when I was up there, there'd be tons of guitars on the walls, in guitar stands, and literally lying on the floor. That's when I came in the one time, and the V was on the floor. I mean, no case. I mean, it was just like, you know, and he was like that about his guitars. You know, he never looked at them as like precious. You know, they were tools. So, like you, Pete, I may have played the original one because we'd go up there sometimes, and you know, again, I write about this. He'd want to jam. I don't know if he would have handed me the original one. He may have. I mean, again, it would have made no difference to him. So I can't swear by it. It's possible, but I know that I did play some of those early, you know, the Kramers. You know what I mean? But I can't swear that I played the actual Frankenstein. But,
yeah. Well,
you know, I'm sorry.
It's all a bit of a blur. I know it can be, right? Here's another one from Middle Militia. Says, hey, Steve, I worship and memorize your interviews with Ed when I was 15 to 17. They meant everything to me. Can you tell the story of meeting Ed at Day on the Green and how that happened, that interview?
That's a great story. So I meet Edward Van Halen for the first time, July 1977 at the Whiskey. I am there to see Cheap Trick record a live record. This was like a record company promo live record, just promotion. The next year they would record, live at Budokan and blow up. But in '77 they were playing the Whiskey, and I thought, wow, Cheap Trick at the Whiskey, that's worth seeing, because 1977, I'm sure everybody might remember, that's the year of punk, right? And I was never a punk fan. And so, there's no way I would have gone to see punk bands at the Whiskey, but Cheap Trick at the Whiskey, that's worth seeing. So I'm there, and this is all just a little bit of a preamble to the Day on the Green story. So I'm there with my brother, waiting for Cheap Trick, and there's a cap on the shoulder, and it's Michelle Meyer. Michelle books the Whiskey. Michelle knew everything that was happening in Hollywood. I had a band at the time, and she booked my band into some of these other clubs that she booked, Madame Wong's East and Madame Wong's West. Pretty famous clubs, right? Madame Wong's East was actually a punk club. Why we ever played there, I was about as far away from punk as you could get, So I owed Michelle. I loved her. I would have done anything for her. She says, listen, there's somebody upstairs you need to meet. So we go up the Whiskey stairs to one of the dressing rooms, and the Whiskey dressing room is like the bottom of a garbage pail. I mean, it stinks and it reeks, and there's cigarette butts on the floor, and dead bodies. And I'm kidding, but it was pretty funky,
Yeah.
And so I look over in the corner and I see this guy. So this is July '77, and the strange thing was I had never seen Van Halen live before meeting him the first time. And I think that may have been partly why we got along so well. I don't know. Look, by '77, as I mentioned earlier, I had interviewed a lot of heavy people. In fact, I just interviewed Blackmore, a lot of heavy guys. So it's not like I was like awestruck meeting these guys, though every time I would sit in a room with them, with any of these guys, I had utmost respect for them. But so it's not like I was going to be tongue-tied or anything. But I think the fact that I had never seen him or heard him play, and now you're just meeting this guy who's in a band, it's like, maybe that was the dynamic that was different. So we go over and we're introduced, and we have a conversation, that was amazing. And again, that's when we talk about Jeff Beck. We had these mutual, love for Beck and Clapton and Blackmore. I knew that Van Halen had just scored a record deal on Warner Brothers Records. So my thought is, well, my God, this band must be amazing. They've got a deal on Warner Brothers Records, So at the end of the conversation, he runs out of the room and he comes back. He's got a pen and he picks up some scrap of paper off the floor and he's writing something down and he hands it to me. And it's his phone number. I says, hey, man, call me. I really like talking to you, or something like that. I can't remember verbatim, but it was something like that, and I thought, yeah, great, Fast forward a year to July '78.
Okay.
The first record has come out. I now realize who this guy is. The first album has come out right in February '78, if I'm getting my years correct, and realizing, oh my God, this Edward Van Halen. So I'm thinking, oh yeah, Van Halen is playing at this Day on the Green show. I was up there to interview Mick Jones from Foreigner, who were headlining the entire show. But I knew that Van Halen was playing. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be great. I'm going to run into Edward again. I had not run into him since the Whiskey. This is going to be so cool. So I get there, and I'm there a little bit early, and I see my buddy Neil Zlozauer there. Neil was a photographer, rock photographer, still is, who would go on to become Van Halen's official photographer. And he had shot Van Halen previously And he said, "Hey, do you want to go back to, Edward's trailer and meet Van Halen?"
Yeah.
Neil did not know that I'd actually met Edward a year before. And instead of trying to explain to him, and the hustle bustle of all this stuff, it's like, I'm just going to go and let him think that he's introducing me.
Sure.
So, because I figure once I see Edward, Edward's oh, hey man, how you doing? Good to see you again. So we go back, and each band sort of had like his own little trailer, nice trailer. But AC/DC was there. In fact, AC/DC opened the show. I think their first record had just come out. Nobody knew who AC/DC was.
Yeah.
Van Halen were second. Pat Travers, Aerosmith, and Foreigner. So I go back, and Edward's just kind of standing out there, and he's got the black and white, and we go up to him. Neil comes up to him, and he knows Neil because Neil has shot a bunch of shows, and he says, "Yeah, Eddie, this is Steve Rosen. Steve, this is Eddie Van Halen. And I expect him to say, "Oh yeah, man, good to see you," or "How you been?" or this and that, and he acts like he had never met me. And it was weird, and it wasn't him trying to be rude or trying to be like a star or anything. It was nothing like that. He just truly did not remember. And those kinds of episodes would happen over and over. He never remembered me introducing him to Les Paul. I don't think he ever remembered me introducing him to Billy Gibbons and Ritchie Blackmore. It was weird. Or I would talk to him, and the next day he would totally forget everything we spoke about. And I just chalked it up to, his head is filled with music, and what's the next guitar riff,
I think there's a lot to be said for that it never is intentional, but it's like there literally is holes, and I can actually relate to that. Sometimes if you're like, he's meeting a lot of people, and it's on and it was at a club when you guys first met and stuff, and it's like, it's we got to give him the pass on that, because you meet a lot of people, and then you're talking, and then you have he's like, "Oh wow, I met that guy," and then you become aware of the record, and you're like, "Oh my god, he's amazing," and then you're like, the next time you meet, he might not. I mean, it's just, also a lot of partying back then and stuff like that. We don't know. Maybe later on that night he had like a bunch of beers or something like that, and then the next day you might not remember very much. But No.
I as you mentioned, Pete, I always gave him a pass. It was never like, "What the fuck you mean you don't remember me introducing you? I was there." Les Paul, remember? Yeah, I think guitar
part of your job as well. I mean, as a journalist and meeting these people and these interesting personalities all the time is navigating all of that, right? I mean, like all these, I think I have a thing about this. Like I became aware of at some point that I was sort of not addicted to, but sort of fascinated with these personalities, like these people on that, because I'm a kid from Edmonton, Canada, and I just grew up playing guitar in a blue collar kind of city and stuff. And it's like, so to be able to like then spend a little time and connect with some of these people, these artists that are like these sort of visionary and stuff, it's very, you're like, yeah, I just want to soak this up. I'm very interested in this and want to be around it and stuff. So and then learn how to navigate, those personalities and how to keep it good and try. I don't know.
Right. No, man. I get it, and we sort of touched on it earlier, and I mentioned it after you referenced it. It was an empathy, and yes, it did take understanding, who these people were, because every person is different, right? I mean, I'm looking at my walls. I have pictures. I'm trying to remember. Albert Lee was different than Dave Davies. It was different than Brian May and Frank Marino. I know somebody out here asked if I'd ever interviewed Frank Marino, and I did. And I think he was somebody on Edward's radar. Frank is one of these unsung guitar players. Well, Pete. I mean, what a unbelievably good guitar player. But they were all different, and I think I had the ability to, you sit down and you just feel something, you just that empathy, and you get it. And sometimes it doesn't work, and so the other question people ask, well, what was your worst interview, or what guys didn't you like? It's like, well, if you really think about it, maybe it was, me that they didn't like, and they were just being who they were. I don't think so, because some of these guys were fucking rude. I mean, I could tell you some of these people.
Blackmore.
Richie Blackmore. Oh my God, what a perfect example. And it's funny. Again, I interviewed Richie several times. I interviewed him, I think, the third time, when it was going to be the cover story for Guitar Player magazine. And he is as charming and erudite and engaging as he could possibly be. Because he knew, again, not that it was just because of me, but it was a cover in Guitar Player magazine. And being on the cover of Guitar Player magazine in the 70s, right, man, that was like a stamp of that was like the golden ticket. Sure. So he was cool. So he did have that ability. But yeah, he was just a strange guy. He was,
People are complicated, right? People are complicated.
Absolutely. And there's many layers, and it could have been a bad day, and maybe the dog was sick. Sure. I could tell a lot of them did not want to be there. It's like, well, okay, so yeah. And all of and I never did a strict count, but there's probably, I bet I've interviewed 2,000 artists over the course of 50 years. And maybe, so 10%, that's way too high. 2%, 1%, a handful have been kind of mean. And maybe it's because I love those guitar players so much, and I did not walk away thinking, oh God, that was such a great interview. So maybe it was more on me thinking that I had failed, and so I put it on them. Oh, he's not a nice guy. You know what I mean?
So, that's the sensitivity to the situation, that empathy coming out again, I think.
Exactly.
It's trying to stand above it and look at the situation. And I think, it's very interesting. It's funny. Do you know Ross Halfin very well?
I ran into Ross a couple times. Okay. I remember specifically was at a Red Hot Chili Peppers. Which album was it? They were doing a day of press. They were, 90, mid 90s somewhere. Anyway, yeah, Ross was there, and obviously a legendary guy. And I'm guessing you're bringing him up because Ross can be, again, I didn't know him that well, but yeah, Ross could be a little challenging.
And he doesn't suffer fools, and so he just told me a story. He told me his Jack Bruce story once, where he was scheduled to take some photos with Jack, and Jack showed up and was in a really not a good mood, and he said, how long is this going to take, or just grumpy about it. And Ross said, it's not my fault you're Scottish and miserable.
That's pretty funny. Yeah,
that set Jack up, I guess, and Jack was just like, okay. And then they'd finish the shoot and got on with it. But that's Ross. Yeah.
That's Ross. Yeah. I could never do that. I could never say that.
Me neither.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I love that he can. I love that he can. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Absolutely. And it's funny, man. Photographers, they have that. They have that thing. Photographers in general have that, and I met a lot of them. And they can be abrupt. They can be like that all the time. Yeah. I approached that situation differently. I approached it more from a thing like, we talked about difficult people. Robert Fripp. I loved King Crimson, right? I thought the first Crimson record, 21st Century Schizoid Man, and then the layered stuff. I mean, oh my God, Look, I realize it's a kind of a, a little bit off the beaten path, but what he did was so unique. Sure. I remember sitting down with him, and I listened to every record. This is probably early 80s. I listened to every record, every track. I had pages and pages of questions. So we sit down, and I've got like my questions, typewritten, right? This is pre-computer. And so he takes the questions, he slides them across this table, turns them around, and he starts reading the question as if he's the interviewer and interviewee. So,
Okay.
when did you start playing, Robert? And this is him saying this. When did you start playing, Robert? I started playing when I was 12 in Bournemouth, England.
Mm-hmm.
All the answers were really short and curt, and this goes on for a while. And I finally said, I go, I really spent a lot of time putting these questions together. I really, really loved what you and Crimson did, man. I didn't deserve to be treated this way. And he loosened up just a little bit. That was my way of doing the Ross Halfin, getting this face saying, you fucking asshole, I'm going to leave. Because I didn't need to be there.
Sure.
I wanted to be there because I love the guy's music so much.
Yeah.
That Christmas, I get a little Christmas letter, Merry Christmas, handwritten in his pen. You'd have to know me to know I wasn't making fun of you.
Oh,
right? Is that freaking cool?
That's so cool. That's so cool. I mean, like his sense of humor is kind of bizarre, I think, and then that's even come out more. Like, did we ever think that we'd see these videos of him and his wife like doing, Metallica covers and things like that? He's out, man. He's funny. I think there's a real, but so sometimes people are complicated once again, and sometimes
exactly. And do I tend to be overly sensitive? Absolutely. I just can't take it because to me it just comes out as disrespect, or those questions don't mean anything, or they're stupid, or that's where I go, and
sure. Let's see. Earl here is a long-time viewer. He's here every week. Thanks for being here, Earl. We appreciate you. He says, Steve, did you ever interview Zappa?
I think Earl may have asked that question because we were referencing guitar players that maybe weren't so easy to get along with. And Frank Zappa was one of them. So I was writing for an English newspaper, and this is amazing that this happened, called Sounds. Sounds was one of the 3 weekly music newspapers. There was Melody Maker, which was the most famous, NME, New Musical Express, and Sounds.
Okay.
I went to Europe with a buddy, and we did like the hitchhiking around Europe and the UK thing. And I walked into the Sounds offices, and it's kind of like youth is, nothing stops you, right? It's like if they say no, okay. So I walked in, and at that point I really hadn't done much writing, but I said, hey, I'd like to be your could I send some stories over? And I have contacts. I don't know what I should. And I became like a correspondent. So I sit down with Zappa, and the Mothers, and Zappa was huge. They were huge in Europe and the UK. Over here, not so much early on. So I sat down, and I wanted to start with some of his background. And again, one of the first questions where I typically start is, well, why did you pick up the guitar, Frank? And, what was your background like? And he says, well, why do you want to know that? I go, well, it's for an English audience, and they're interested, And he goes, well, I've talked about this before. And I said, not in an English publication, you haven't. And he goes, so, well, really all that you're doing is just and I don't have his exact words memorized. I do have it on tape. So all you're doing is rehashing what I've already talked about, and you're trying to glean new information from old things that I've spoken to you. And he goes on for 5 minutes, which is basically one long fucking insult. So, at that point I'm numb, and I just kind of walk through the rest of the interview. Fast forward, 75 or 76, I'm tasked to interview Frank Zappa for the cover of Guitar Player magazine.
Oh my God.
So I'm thinking, well,
Mm.
my God, I know it's going to happen, but it's like, I was a professional in my own way. It's like, um, I never walked away from an interview. I never left an interview early. I thought, oh, sure, I'll do that. And again, like Blackmore, Frank was on his best behavior.
Mm.
The interview was great. Eric Clapton played on "We're Only in It for the Money." He plays under a pseudonym. So obviously, I asked him about Clapton. He talked about Clapton, and it was a really good interview. I mean, it really
Wow.
was. But Frank was a tough one. One little postscript here. Frank lived up on Woodrow Wilson, which was just around the corner. Well, maybe Pete, if you were there at Edward's house, was just sort of a little tributary street off of Mulholland.
Right.
So literally, I just went up Laurel Canyon, banged a right on Mulholland, and then right on Woodrow Wilson. And I was at Frank's house. Frank actually owned two houses, one that he lived in and one with his studio. And he had just
there once in the studio, but I got to go there. Yeah. And actually, I got to play the Rasta guitar there as well as the Hendrix Miami Strat. That was
there you go, fantastic,
great day. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Right. It's okay, man. So I'm there interviewing him, and there may have been I may have gone to his house to do the guitar player interview, possibly. Hard to remember, but probably because it was in town. I can't imagine we would have gone to a hotel. That would have been ridiculous. So I think it was at his house. So I noticed that as I'm walking in, there's like a little pen outside, and there's like 2 or 3 little dogs in there, little puppies, and so we do the interview, and I'm looking, and he says, "Oh, would you like to have a little puppy?" And they turned out to be German Shepherd puppies. I mean, they were beautiful, And I go, "Yes, that'd be amazing." I mean, the truth of it is, thinking about it now, I lived in this very small place. Having a German Shepherd in there would have been crazy. But the other thought was, and maybe this was a little selfish, it's like, I can tell everybody that this is one of Frank Zappa's dogs. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Maybe girls would dig that story or something. I don't know. So I said, "Listen, can I come back tomorrow and pick it up?" He goes, "Yeah, sure." So I go back the next day, and there's no pen. It's like a little wire thing. There's no pen. So I'm thinking, oh, he's probably got the dogs in the house. So I knock on the door, and Frank answers. I go, "Hi, Frank. I came to, pick up the dog." He goes, "Oh, well, I gave it away." I go, "Excuse me?"
Oh.
He goes, "Yeah, I gave the dog away." And I got a little angry. I go, "Why would you do that, man? I told you I was going to come back for it." He goes, "Well, I don't know." And that pissed me off. That was just being an asshole. And I already had a name for him. I was going to call him Ferrari, but spelled F-U-R-R, as in fur. So,
oh man, that is a bizarre. I mean, not the only time that a famous rock musician that you were to procure a pet from, and you actually did, right? There was a cat.
I did, and that was
Valhalla.
Valhalla. I mean, that's clever, right? I mean, that is smart. Val for Valerie and Halla for Halen.
So the Van Halens, you go over to the Van Halens one day, and Valerie's got this litter of kittens, right?
She does, and I mean, the first thing out of her mouth, and Val and I were look. It's not like we hung out when I wasn't up at 5150, but she was always so welcoming, and I was there a fair amount, we'd go in the house. Usually I would just go out to the studio, but a lot of times, he'd be busy or in the house, and so I'd, come into the house, and she was just always, she was great, so I walk in one time, and there's like a whole little, box full of kittens. He goes, "Oh, you want a kitten?" And I had cats. I was always a cat person because, again, I grew up with dogs, but I always lived in such small spaces. A dog, I'd have to walk them every day, and cats are so much easier to take care of. So she says, "We'd like a cat." And I go, "I would love to have a cat." And I'm pretty sure I picked out the cat who will become Valhalla, which is just all black cat, and it was amazing. And I have a picture of her in the book, And she was amazing. And again, I don't know how long I had her, not long, maybe a year or so. And she got one of those feline horrible diseases, and passed away. And that was horrible. And again, I write about in the book, I never told Valerie, because I think she would ask, well, how's the cat? How's Valhalla? Because I told her what I would name. I named the cat. I just didn't have the heart to tell her, because then I was afraid. Oh my God, she's thinking, oh my God, I gave him my cat, and the cat's gone in the years. Like, I wouldn't be allowed in the house. I don't think she ever would have thought that, but yeah, that was pretty amazing. Pretty incredible cat. Which just went to, we were comfortable around each other, and again, I write about this in the book, and the best way I can describe it is she knew that I really cared about her husband, and there was nothing I would ever do would harm him. I don't mean physically, because he would have kicked the shit out of me, but I would have never lied to him or done something or said something about him or her that ever would have betrayed any of that friendship. So I think she sensed all of that. And Valerie was, again, a big champion for the book, and she knew I was writing the book, and she said to me, and again, I write about this, and I had forgotten about this until I listened to the tapes writing the book all those years later. And she goes, you got to push him harder. You got to get him to sit down and do the book. She recognized that the book was important. Look, not that he needed my book to cement his legacy, but it was part of his legacy. It was a book, and she recognized that. She understood, those things that maybe Edward didn't see. Sure. That was fantastic that she did that and felt that way.
Daniel says up front center stage during early teens at that historic day on the green, 7/23/78.
Wow.
Quite a memorable epic event. That's so awesome, Daniel, that you got to be there. On the last I do this gig every year with a group called Classic Rock Show over in the UK, and we play Zeppelin and The Who and Pink Floyd and always a little Van Halen as well. And it's cool. So fun. It's a nice theater show, and it's a celebration of great rock is what it is. But last year we did I'm the One, and I did a little Van Halen didn't make it to England a lot during those first during that, right? And so it's like they were there opening for Sabbath and whatnot in 78, and they didn't really make it back, I don't think, till 84. So there's this whole, but I found it fascinating that some of those, the first tour, some of those early, I remember reading about it in Dave Lee Roth's, his book as well about those shows in Scotland and, and in the UK. And so interesting. But anyway, I used to do a little speech before we'd play I'm the One and say, so Van Halen on tour, opening for Sabbath, 1978. I remember, I would do this every time. There's always somebody there. I'd always say, was anybody here in attendance at one of those shows? And every single time I said it, somebody would go, I was there. And I remember in Sheffield one night, saying that. And I said, I'm so jealous. I said, what was it like? And he said, it was fucking brilliant. And play. And I was just so enamored with, this, because I remember, some of my fondest memories of growing up or going to, I saw everybody that I could in the 80s in my hometown venue, the Northlands Coliseum at Edmonton. I'd go see whoever came through town, the Doobies, and certainly Van Halen, a Journey on the Escape tour. And I was nuts about it. And so some of those memories are just so ingrained in my brain. But you saw so many of these shows. So is there any, I just got to ask you about anything in mind or top 5 or something, shows that you saw, or maybe you weren't like Aerosmith for the first time or the Whiskey, or is there something particular where you're like, I saw these guys and it was like, oh my God, or maybe not so, oh my God, or whatever.
Right. That's a great question. And I'll go to the other side of that question.
Okay.
So before I start writing, one of my greatest joys was going to concerts,
Sure.
and going to the Santa Monica Civic and standing in line and buying tickets for Mountain or you know, the whole experience, seeing the ads in the newspaper, and
Right.
seeing the promoters, right? Pacific Presentations and Wolf and Rissmiller. And I would later talk to those guys. I actually interviewed them,
Yeah.
you know, because there was, you know, several promoters, like uh, promoters would typically, you know, have an area, a geographical area, and they would promote those shows. So there was guys who did all the shows in California, and then there were guys who promoted in the East Coast. So once I start writing, and I'm now receiving tickets and backstage passes, and what happens a little bit, and I don't want to blow anybody's image thinking, oh, you saw shows and now you don't even remember them. But it's like Pete, you play your first few shows and it's like, oh my God, I remember that, you know, and then, 300 shows later, it's like, well, I'm not sure, did I play really well or who
Sure.
at least my memory, so the point being, I saw a lot of shows, some I can't remember. I don't think you can see, maybe you can see like some of the backstage passes and things, and sometimes I'll have to look and go, oh my God, that's right, I did see 10cc, or I did see Camel, or I did see, it's like I have to look at the backstage passes to kind of remember. But in answer to your question, I think what you're getting at, what shows really stick out? My God, there were so many. I remember seeing, and this is actually before I started writing, so this is 68, or maybe it's 69. Jeff Beck group at the Los Angeles Shrine Auditorium with Rod. I thought, oh my God, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And what's amazing, they were just amazing. And what's amazing, so it's like 4 years later, and I'm sitting in a room with Jeff Beck. And as I'm sitting there in that room with him, I go back to sitting on, the Shrine was open seating. You would sit on the floor. And so my mind goes back, I'm really talking to Jeff Beck and 4 years earlier, so those kinds of things are pretty amazing. Traffic at the Santa Monica Civic in 74 was, oh my God, it was amazing. Spirit, I love Spirit. I think Randy California is one of the greatest unsung guitar players ever. Seeing Spirit, oh my God, there have been so many. Tull, I think it was the Aqualung tour. God, again, there's another unsung guitar player, Martin Barr. Oh my God, right? Oh Jesus. Again, I'm looking at the walls here. Oh my God. Well, again, these are shows that I saw before I started writing.
Yeah.
Actually, Cream at the Forum was mind blowing. I saw Hendrix twice.
What was that like?
Oh my God. I saw him at the Forum, and then I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl. I think 68 and 69. The Hollywood Bowl show, it's pretty famous. The Hollywood Bowl had a moat in front of it that was filled with water. Yeah. And people were jumping in the moat, and the water was spilling over the edge, and he's there with his little, the arbor, little round fuzz they used to use, or a wah-wah pedal. Nothing is grounded, and he's like stepping back. I mean, he was like probably inches. Of course, nobody realized it from being zapped, and they could have been zapped if, his cable or something fell into the water. And I was about 2 minutes away from jumping into the water. So it was probably a little chilly out that night, but he was amazing. And you know what it is? You wish you could go back with your sense of, what you know now. I wish I knew then what I know now, and look at that and try to absorb what it was, seeing Cream, seeing Hendrix. You're just there, and you realize the spectacle of it, and you hear Cream doing Sunshine of Your Love and White Room, and it's like, oh my God, those are those songs on the records, and this is Eric Clapton and Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, those were amazing.
I know what you mean. It can be well, I'm getting a bit of an echo now. some reason.
Are you?
That is, yeah. I wonder. I think that's better actually. That stopped. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hearing my own voice come back, but it's okay now. Yeah, I know what you mean about like you can forget, especially as a musician. I mean, I'll see YouTube videos of myself now, and I'm like, well, that's me, but I don't remember being there. And it's mostly when I see videos with Chris Cornell playing with him because I wish I could remember every moment better. But I'll see these shows and be like, well, that was probably show number 274, and I'm not checked into. But there's some I remember, but also even shows that like I have a hard time, I hate to admit it, but like I'm a big Rush fan. I have a hard time admitting the last time I saw Rush. Like, did I see them twice in this period, and I just can't quite remember, but it's weird, we just have these memories. I got to tell you my shrine story though, because you mentioned cool things happening at the shrine. I actually got to meet Muhammad Ali at the shrine.
Wow.
And that was like for me meeting a real life superhero. Like musicians are one thing, but like Muhammad Ali was like an amazing experience. So we were playing a television show there, or sorry, it was an award show, the Sports Illustrated Awards show, and I was playing there with the band Five for Fighting because there was some sports affiliation between them, and and so anyways, we opened up the show. And Muhammad Ali was actually supposed to be sitting right in front of me. I remember because the seats all had names on them during sound check. And it's, right in front of me, you'd see the various, it'd be, Michael Jordan, all these different people. There's like Muhammad Ali right in front. I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to play guitar and looking at Muhammad Ali. Well, we start the performance and he's not there. The seat's empty. I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. But anyway, we play our song and then we actually had a red-eye flight to catch right after we finished playing. So we had to run up to the dressing room, grab our things, and leave right away. So we played, got off stage, ran up the stairs to the dressing room at the shrine. I remember I got my bag and everything, and coming down the stairs, and I was first in line of everybody kind of going up the stairs behind me. I'm like first, and I get to the bottom step, and there's a hallway there that goes out to the parking lot or into the venue from backstage. And a guy stops me, puts his arm in front of me, says, "Just hold on a second," And here comes Muhammad Ali. He was late. Was all it was. And he comes walking down the hallway quite slowly. He had Parkinson's at this point. That was advanced and everything. But he's walking down the hallway with folks, helping him and stuff. And I just had that face that probably looked like I'm seeing, real life Superman come. I just lit up, right? And I'm smiling, and my eyes are like saucers, right? And I know it, that's I'm just enamored. And he comes walking by me, and he stopped, and he turned, and he looked at me right in the eye, and he just stared at me with this grin on his face, and then he punched me in the chin like that.
Did he really? Oh my God, that's great.
It was the greatest moment of my life. That was where I peaked. That was it. I mean, we all have these guitar players and everything. It was Muhammad Ali, and he just looked at me and he did one of these on my chin. And he kept walking down the hall. And my whole band was behind me. And I remember Andrazik from Five for Fighting, the main singer-songwriter. He's like, "Oh, you son of a bitch." He's like, that was the coolest thing ever. He was like, "I can't believe that was you and not me." I was like, oh my God. I could have I was like died and gone to heaven, in that moment. It was the craziest thing. He never said a word. He just did that. And then he kept walking.
Wow. That is
anyway,
great. Man.
That's my shrine story. Only time I've been there, but it's cool. We both got a cool, like your Jeff Beck experience. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Back in the day, the shrine, they used to have way back, going back to the 60s, they had all those concerts. And then, there was concerts at the shrine through the 70s, through the 80s. I mean, maybe they still have them, but I used to see a lot of shows there. I remember one of the first times I was there. In fact, it could have been that Jeff Beck show. I remember people realizing it now. People were passing around joints. And, so this is, if this is 69, I was like 16, and it was like, I looked at that as like, oh my God, you want me to like shoot heroin or something? I'm not going to do that. I was terrified. I remember my buddy, I think he took a hit or a couple of hits, and I thought, oh my God, he drove. It's like, what's going to happen to him, but you can remember that smell. I can remember that smell,
Yeah, sure.
Unbelievable. And one of the other things, I'm sorry, Pete, just real quick, another shrine. So I was at the shrine a couple of times. I'm trying to think. There was Jeff Beck. I saw somebody else there. The show might have been Jeff Beck 10 years after and the Moody Blues. But in one of these shows, the Moody Blues opened. So again, this is like, I mean, way before, Nights in White Satin. I mean, this is like Go Now. I mean, this is way early on. I remember they started the show and they started, and they're going like through the music, an intro, and I can't remember the song. But the sound just cuts out.
Mm.
And I'm looking at, and they're going around and they fix it. And the guy says something. I just thought that was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
Mm.
It's like, oh my God, like this is a big concert and the sound goes out and these guys still get up and play. I couldn't comprehend it, because I mean, by then I was playing guitar a little bit and I thought, I couldn't imagine. My God, if that was me and that happened, I'd go run in the corner or something. It was just so great to see something like that.
Those are the shows you remember. I mean, that's some of the greatest things that I can recall is incidents like that happening. Seeing the Rolling Stones and Keith Richards had for Brown Sugar had the capo on the wrong fret, and he plays at stadium, and he hits the wrong chord because the fret's one fret too high, and he goes down, and it sounded like chaos, and the look on his face on the jumbotron, and he just laughed and moved the capo, and then started again, and I was like, I always remember that because it was like, oh, he's a human being, it's a human thing. I remember playing Salt Lake City with Chris Cornell and the power going off. And that's a shocking thing. The whole, all of a sudden everything drops. The PA, the amps, I got inners in. And like, there's no sound on. All the emergency lighting comes on in the venue. And Chris was so good at stuff like that. He turns around and looks at our drummer Sutter and points at him and goes, "Drum solo!" Because it's the only thing that still works. The acoustic drums, of course. And I thought, God, that's brilliant. Like he just responded so fast, and everybody there would remember that as being like, "Oh, I remember that." The power went off and then the drummer did a 5-minute solo because that was the only thing until the power came on.
That's unbelievable. You tell me these stories about playing in the band in the UK and playing with Chris Cornell. I mean, I am jealous. I mean, I got it.
You've got so many stories and experiences with all these folks,
But I always wanted to be a guitar player in the band. That's what I wanted to do. I looked at music journalism as, well, maybe that's a way to hang out with guys and open some doors, and I'll be hanging out with managers and publicists and musicians, As it turns out, that was like, they look at you like you're a journalist first, and oh, you play guitar? Well, you know what I mean? It's one of those things. Those who can't teach, it was one of those kinds of things. But
but the guitar players, I think, get it. When you get a little,
maybe they did, but I had so much, again, respect for them. It's like and I think I did it a couple times where I would have told the guitar player or somebody, "Hey, I play guitar, and I've got some songs, would you listen?" I probably not more than a handful of times, and a couple guys listened,
But Ed was well aware that you.
Yeah, he was
passing the guitars around, and so cool.
Yeah. He said, I remember he said one time, you get it, you understand, I mean, I don't think he ever commented saying, "Oh my God, what an amazing guitar player you are," but I think he sensed that I knew,
Sure.
that I got, I understood what he was talking about, and I could, so that was cool.
Lauren here, L. Scott Music, is just asking, doesn't want to distract from the topic of Ed, but any Tom Petty experiences? Did you ever interview Tom or Mike or any of the?
Yeah, I did interview Tom. So I met Tom Petty when the Heartbreakers had just been signed. I think they were signed to Dunhill, which was a little offshoot label. I mean, this is like the first album. So he's just,
cool.
Right? He's this guy. Where's Tom from? Is he a Georgia
He's from
guy?
Florida. Florida, I think.
Florida.
Yeah.
He's from Florida.
I think that's right.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Gainesville, I think.
Yes.
And so I remember it was like a record release party or just some, promo party for this Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, I had never heard of them.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'd heard of them. I certainly didn't know their music. And so we were all there. And I just remember thinking, wow, this guy is like, he's a pretty amazing looking guy. You know, he had the blonde hair. He looked like a, you know, he could have been the worst musician in the world, but he looked fucking great. You know what I mean? He just had that thing, you know. And I think I probably said hello, and he said hello, and you know, I think the whole band was there. You know, fast forward, those records start coming out, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is that Tom Petty guy. You know, what an amazing songwriter, singer, and guitar player.
Yeah.
And somewhere around it was that album he did, and he wrote that great song with the English guy from the Eurythmics.
Oh, Dave
Stewart.
Stewart.
I'm sorry?
Dave Stewart.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. Yes. Don't go running around here. You know, yeah, that one great song I can't think of the title.
Did Dave Stewart write that? Don't Come Around Here No More? Is that the song?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
No, that's not it. I'm sorry. Oh God, somebody in the audience knows this. Was it the Wildflowers record? Oh. Yeah, I think it was a solo Petty record. I don't think it was a Heartbreakers record. Okay. But I met him at his management office. His managers had an office on Sunset Boulevard. And I remember sitting in the office, and you could look out into Sunset Boulevard. And I heard stories about Petty by then, that he was, you know, a little difficult to get along with, and this and that, you know. And he was so cool, man. He was funny and self-effacing. And I said to him, I go, Tom, you know, I mean, there have been stories about you, and I was, you know, didn't know what to expect, you know. And he said something like, well, don't believe everything you read, or he, you know, obviously he'd heard the stories as well, and you know, but he was great. What a freaking tragedy of, you know, whatever happened. Yeah, you know, but
no, yeah, between him and Prince and everything kind of around the same. It was just another.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's the problem in this country of the lines getting blurred between, oh, it's prescription, so it must be legit, right?
Exactly. Right. You know, and I don't want to get into this, and I don't want to get into politics, but an accidental overdose is, to me, about the most oxymoronic description of something I've ever heard. It's just, I don't know. It's horrible. You know what I mean? And yeah, maybe it was accidental. Well, why the fuck are you doing them in the first place? And I'm not trying to pass judgment. We all have our things that we don't want to talk about and bad stuff, but I don't know. Yeah, it's just.
Well, at the core, we're all just human beings, right? And it's like we talk about these people, and we're, you know, the respect and the you know, they get placed on this pedestal, and we want to be careful. And then there's all of that. The dark side of it all is, of course, maybe when they need somebody to step in, you know, from Michael Jackson to this person to that, but it's just like they don't have got a lot of yes men around, and a lot of people just trying to keep their jobs and stuff, and sometimes that ends very badly, you know. And also they're, you know, trying to, I think, just hide things so that it just get on with it. And then you know, Prince was always very I think anti using anything, you know. He was always very you know, because he was such a hard worker and all about music and ethic and stuff like that. And then the guy, you know, gets older, and your body starts breaking down and stuff, and he's probably suffering from some pain, and he's famously private, and it just ended up the way it ended up. And it's very sad, you know. It's
very sad. And I don't want to go here, Pete, but I think you probably certainly know more about it than I would. But I mean, I think of somebody like Chris Cornell, who from the outside, I mean, I thought he was one of the best singers I've ever heard in my life. I mean, right, and his writing, and look, he was an incredible looking guy. He was successful, and again, I don't know beyond that.
Yeah,
why that would have happened, but you know, you look from the outside and you think, what could he have been going through to, you know, and committing that kind of suicide is.
Yeah.
Look,
it's a combination of things that all culminated in just a very, 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 having a very, very, very bad day, I think. And that we're all human, and that if that combined with, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts about it, but it's completely the same. I mean, to me, it's the same of trying to, when these guys, when they want to do something, that's the other thing. When they wanted to do something like, this is what I'm going to do, like, and then there's people in their employ around them that are like, okay, like, that can be, I just want to be alone right now, closing the door, and okay, and, no calls, leave me and whatever. And then they isolate themselves and whatever. And that's the least thing that they need at that point,
Right. No, you're right. And again, I write about it in the book. And I don't want to give the book away in case you haven't read it. And if you haven't read it, why the hell not? Go out and buy it. I'm kidding. But Edward, there you go.
Love that guitar.
Edward. Yeah, isn't that a cool one?
Yeah, with the Rockinger tremolo on it, which you never see him use. I had one of those on my first guitar. Rockinger Bridge, Noetta Floyd Rose. Check it out, folks. Am I a nerd or what? But anyways.
God, only you would freaking know that, That was when we talked about Neil Zlozauer earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. Or I think I did. That's Neil's shot. And I love that photo. I didn't want a live shot because we've seen a million live shots. And I was hopefully looking for, a shot with a guitar that you didn't see a whole lot, so
yeah,
hence I lost the guitar. And there's a story behind that too, right? With isn't that the Dweezil Zappa guitar? Or one of those, and I don't know the exact backstory, but
yeah, Dweezil ended up with the Rasta. And the Rasta guitar, I don't want to get my guitars mixed up, but I think it might have been the Circles guitar. So, or one of those two, the Rude guitar or the Circles guitar ended up getting painted and turned into the Rasta guitar. And I believe then it also, here's an interesting little thing. I think when I played it, it ended up with the neck from the Bumblebee, maybe. It was a bird's eye maple neck, so you and I might have played the same guitar neck. Because you played the Bumblebee, obviously, that day during the 79 interview. And I think that neck ended up on that guitar, which years later I played up at Frank Zappa's studio when Dweezil still had those instruments. And I think that's right. I could be totally butchering that, but
yeah,
I'm about 87% sure that either the Rasta or the Rude guitar got painted and turned in. Sorry, the Circles guitar or the Rude guitar from around the Fair Warning era got painted, ended up as the Rasta guitar with a DiMarzio X2N pickup in the bridge, the Van Halen 2 Bumblebee guitar neck, and ended up with Dweezil Zappa. So
there you go.
Yeah, super nerdy.
Exactly.
Anyway, this guitar I never saw him use after. I've seen this photo, and Neil took this picture, right? Which I give props to Neil as well. He's got a great book called Ed By's Laws, right? I believe.
Exactly.
Right? Which is his,
Yep, you got to go get that book for sure.
Terrific book of photographs. But this would be around, I mean, this is probably the Diver Down era, right? I think.
Diver Down?
I think, with those pants, this outfit. The hair going by all that. And also I think it's probably 82, 83, this picture probably. But fascinating. Anyway.
Yeah. So, talking about people around you. Edward changed. I sensed it. And again, it was around the time they had new management.
So this is the late 80s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s, yeah.
And he changed. I mean, he changed. I sensed it. I was aware of it from that point moving forward. We hang out until off and on until 2003, and that's that horrible period. We see those pictures, and he's got the hair up in the samurai bun and the torn jeans and the teeth that are decayed, and the pants being held up by a rope or whatever it was. And you know, where does that come from? I mean, look, Edward has always had an addictive personality. We always know that. But in all those years, those early years I was with him, I mean, look, and I was here, I did it with him, and I write about that. And he drank, which I didn't, because I was susceptible to migraine headaches. And even looking at a beer, you could get a migraine. And it's, for those who have never had a migraine, it's one of the worst things you can imagine. So and I didn't like the taste of alcohol anyway, but I was getting high with him. But the difference was, I think, I'd go home and I never had Coke at home. Edward would keep doing it, Hey, that's fine. That's who he was. But it never seemed to be out of control. There were one or two times when when it was pretty bad, and I write about it, and his nose is dripping and this and that. But the next day he'd be fine,
Yeah.
But man, around that 2003, around right 2004, it's bad. It's really bad. And look, we've seen it happen a lot. Why didn't the people around Keith Moon say something, or John Bonham? I mean, it happened. You're in a band with this person and you allow that to happen. I mean, the reality is no one can help you but yourself. So I don't know, but Edward did change, and I think it did have something to do with the people who were around him.
And also maybe the people that weren't around anymore, right? Because he went through, of course, his parents passing away, and then, like you mentioned, management change, right?
Yeah.
And there was all these people that had helped probably in that aspect, that were able to help the guy. Because also, we got to keep in mind how young he was when he, success, and it was the Van Halen brothers against the world, coming up as, immigrants, very poor, couldn't speak English when they first came to the country. The two of those guys together, and they just did what worked. And boy, did it ever work around 1978 or 79. And, hey, we hit the magic formula. Hey, we can just be ourselves and do what we do. Let's keep doing what we do. And they did what they did until it just, because it obviously doesn't work at some point.
Yeah.
And so we can't, I think that you're, in many ways, when you make that kind of, FU money or whatever, and your emotional development can stop at a certain point, like right about the point that you make your first million or whatever. And then from then on, you've got a lot of people working for you, but not necessarily but he had his parents, and he had the management, and had people that would, and I'll probably always his older brother to a degree, right? And then Val as well, right? And and then once that goes away, now you're still that, guy just trying to function the only way you've known how, but without any of all the guardrails are maybe gone, or most of them. So maybe not just the people you're around, but the people that weren't around anymore.
Right. No, that's interesting, man. I never thought about that. And you're right. Yeah, the parents pass away. I know his dad passing was horrible for him. The manager they had, Ed Leffler, passes away, and he was really the glue.
Right.
So you're right. You have new management coming in.
Which
your singer,
experience, right?
I'm sorry.
New management was not a good experience, I don't think. I think it was Ray Daniels, right? Started managing, and it was just not a good marriage, I don't think.
No. I'm sorry, Pete. I couldn't hear what you said. No, it wasn't a good marriage. And this comes from people that were there, guys in the crew, and they were saying that thing. It's not just me guessing, but you know what I mean. They saw that, and you're right. So later on, the marriage is in trouble. The label isn't happy. Your singer is left. You have a new singer, and then there's problems with that singer, and you have a third singer come in. And good, bad, or indifferent, Van Halen fans weren't going to embrace a third singer. Right? It could have been anybody. I think that was just too much to ask. The drugs get worse, and he's diagnosed, and that sickness is getting worse. So yeah, it's,
But then an amazing thing happens eventually, right? Which is, and I always try and I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So although he passed away too young, and although we lost Chris Cornell far too young, these kinds of folks, uh, there's a similarity between the two guys who, oh, by the way, they were hanging a bit in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think, as well. Chris and Ed, in those dark partying days, there was a connection there. They knew one another. That's how I met Ed.
Oh, wow.
But they hadn't talked or anything in a lot of years. There wasn't a lot of connection there. I just read through them for something else the other day, but I've got beautiful texts from Ed talking to me about Chris when Chris passed away and how he'd been trying to contact him, but they hadn't been in touch for a long time because Ed thought that Chris's people were trying to keep him away from because of that connection to when they were both in a dark place. And so anyways, but point being, the thing that I always try and the way I always try and look at it is that these are two guys we could have very easily lost, probably right around that same time, the late 90s, early 2000s, very easily. From the stories I've been told, at least with Chris, I know more stories like actual, that could have been it right then. And that what ends up happening is a miraculous thing that, and I think this is the same for Ed. I think it was through family that we ended up getting many, many, many more years, and Chris passed away in 2017, Ed not too long after. And but all those years because when I met Ed, he was sober and was really together, and he'd really worked hard, and that was Wolf, I think. And to some degree the other folks as well, around him that were supportive of Matt and Janie at the time, and his new wife, but he found family again in a unit that helped him. And then he all the time I was friends with him. I mean, after that, through that whole period, the next 10 years, he was fighting to, constant health concerns and things like that, always. But we know from seeing him in 2012 and 2015 on stage, and it's like, oh my God, look at, would you ever thought, when you see him on stage, I remember watching him on stage at the Hollywood Bowl, the last Van Halen show at the Hollywood Bowl, and seeing him up there. And if you look at him in 2003, 4, 5, 6, how can that even be the same person? That it's like he was amazing as his ability to fight and go for it and try and and so that happened. And I gotta say that I think that's a beautiful thing, that it's as dark as it got, wow, he was able to pull through. And Chris too, many more years of productive and loving and existence on this planet, before we finally lost him, which is tragic. Anyways.
Interesting for sure. Wolf was I think Wolf was his saving grace for sure.
His rock that got him to
and, definitely.
He had so much. I mean, Ed's love for Wolf and respect, and when we would be together, he would just talk about him and talk about how great he was and how he goes, I'm almost jealous, man, because he'd be like, he can do everything, play drums and write and sing, and he'd be like, I'm almost jealous. He said that to me, like, of my son, but he's so proud, he's like, wait till you hear like what he's doing, and sure enough, look at what he's done. It's beautiful. So yeah,
he did have that blood coursing through him for sure, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Thing. But Ryan Casey there came in with a super chat, and I just had highlighted it a while ago, just saying, great stories, thanks guys. And Jose as well, great show, great interview, welcome Steve.
Oh, thanks guys.
Yeah.
So is this the $4.99? That's what they're going to send me for telling all these stories, or what? What's this?
It's 100%. So here we go. We got to talk about the book one more time. There's a link in the video description where you can go check out the book. You guys have got to check out the book because it's just fantastic. And once again, make sure that you don't sleep on the audiobooks, that's obvious probably at the link, right? How to get the audiobooks as well.
Yeah, you can get the audiobook on my webpage at tonechaserbook.com. Just scroll down the page and you can get both audiobooks. So there are two audiobooks. So the first audiobook is Tonechaser. I do the narration, and that was a challenge, let me tell you. Reading your own words for 300,000 words, and And, it's like, oh my God, stumbling over words that I've written 1,000 times. It's
How
just
long did it take?
unbelievable.
How long did it take to record
It
all
took me, it took about 8 months.
that? Oh, wow.
I went luckily I met this guy who just lived about 10 minutes from where I live here in Lake Forest, California, which is close to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And he had like a little studio in the garage, and we'd go and, we try to get through a chapter a day, and man, sometimes I would start and I just, the words were written and then they were never meant to be spoken, at least certainly not spoken by me.
Right.
And I've always been a pretty voracious reader, so I've read a lot, but sitting there and having to speak those words and trying to find the right tone. And when I say tone, yeah, I was tone chasing, the right emotion to bring to sections. Cause I've heard other, professional narrators, and it tends to be real monotone. It's like, what they do is professional and it sounds good, but there's not a lot of emotion during what should be emotional sections of the book, So I didn't know how far to go, and I didn't want it to sound maudlin or, dramatic, overly dramatic, So trying to find that balance. And I'm a big guy of like alliteration and, literary things. The sizzling sun shines Sunday, it sounds great when you're writing that stuff, but having to speak that, you're stumbling over your tongue.
Yeah.
But so I did the narration. I finally got to the narration, and I was actually going to narrate all of the interviews that you're reading in the book. So I was, Steve Rosen, Edward, when did you first start playing guitar? Edward, well, I started playing when I was 15, and and I was gonna, it was gonna all be in my voice, and I thought that just seems so odd to me. Most audiobooks, the single narrator is not reading a narrative, is not reading what someone is speaking. It's more kind of all, straight narrative. It's description stuff. It's not the narrator taking on the voice of a character. I mean, I realize it happens, but in my book, there's so much of that. And I thought, God, that's weird. And I thought, well, my God, what if I could use like the actual audio that I did, all these interviews from back in the day? And so we decided to do that. And that was challenging to get everything, together and cleaned up. And I have a friend in Australia who did all that, my friend Adam Roach. But now you're hearing all this amazing archival stuff I recorded with Edward dating back to 78. And you're hearing those little guitar bits in there. And, I don't think any other audiobook has ever done that, taking the actual audio from the person who the book was about and embedding that. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then a second audiobook, which just came out a couple months ago, called Van Halen's Voices, which include some stuff that I've had up on my YouTube page, plus some other stuff. I mean, there's interviews from Alex, Mike, Dave, a rare interview with Sammy alone in '86. He did hardly any interviews by himself. A Gary Sharon interview done much later. I think Rudy Laren, Edward's guitar tech, Zeke, guitar tech during the '80s. Kevin Hill, who was in the Broken Combs, like when Edward was just like a little kid, and they talked about playing cowboys and Indians and forts with little cardboard boxes. So there's some pretty cool stuff in there as well. So
just chock full of great stuff, honestly. So I've still got a lot of those to get to, the Alex and the Sammy interviews, and but I've just been fascinated with listening to Ed and you hang mostly, and listening to the that playing and so great. So it's really just been terrific. Chris was just asking, wasn't the, I wanted to hit this because people generally come here to ask me like the nerdy tech questions, and that's what we indulge in. So I wanted to hit this one. Wasn't the roster of Circles guitar mahogany and thicker than a regular Strat? Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it was. It was a big beefy Strat body with, and I believe I remember looking and going, is it mahogany? And I think I could see some of the, rubbing through the finish had rubbed away. So you can see the color. So yeah, I just looking through some other of the comments here. There's Lauren again saying, when Eddie played, it was like a kid magician showing off a new trick he'd just learned. So excited to perform. Yeah, I mean, he always had that childlike, there was always a little bit of that smile on his face. I mean, you never saw somebody so happy playing guitar, right?
Absolutely.
That is true, and that was part of how the way that he made us feel. I think it was like he's doing this amazing stuff, and then also like having a great time doing it.
Absolutely.
There's nothing like executing something perfectly on the guitar, playing beautifully, and looking like you're at a recital.
Exactly.
It's just it's not that interesting. Maybe Robert Fripp or something could pull that off, and it just
right.
But it's
right, exactly. And Edward would do all these amazing things, and he wouldn't think that they were like anything amazing. He just they're just tricks, and and that's just how he looked at it.
Some of the recordings of him in the mid '70s that have come out that are on YouTube of him playing at some place in I think there's one in Pasadena, like Hilton or something like that, some party they'd be playing, or are just before he actually had started tapping very much, or where he's just playing. I mean, they're playing like Pat Travers tunes and ZZ Top and holy, I mean, he's just like 18 years old or 19 years old and just flawless execution rock guitar playing. It's so exciting to listen to. E-Bars, how are you, man? There's another long-time viewer saying, great to hear these experiences and think about these amazing lives. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that we were talking about a little earlier that I think Steve and I share is this fascination with these people that burn so bright, and just kind of, how does that happen? Getting close to that is it's something I've always been fascinated with.
It's pretty amazing, and that's why part of basically I'm a one-man show, so I self-published the book and had it printed, and the marketing is me talking to somebody like you, the promotion rather, and reaching out to artists and stuff, and hey man, are you a Van Halen fan? And so man, I really love to send you a book, and would you take a picture with the book, and would you put up a post, and what fascinates me is again his appeal across the board. So you talk about Muhammad Ali. I would have loved to, did Muhammad Ali know who Edward Van Halen was? Well, maybe somewhere, before he got sick, But the point being is, like, I love reaching out to these people, music teachers, or trying to reach out to athletes, because all those basketball guys coming in, when you see them walking into the arenas, man, they've all got their iPods on, and they're all listening to something. It's like I would imagine some of them are listening to some metal shit, right? And trying to get a hold of those guys. So I got a hold of like one of the guys who shot video for like the Miami Dolphins, and somebody who worked for Kansas City football team. So I just love that idea of reaching out to these people, and maybe we'll take a picture with the book. Just how Edward touched their lives, or they were aware of him somehow.
Who was the tennis player? Who was the tennis player that was Ed's buddy? Famous McEnroe. Right.
Becker and McEnroe, right? Exactly.
They were in Kramer ads together, I remember. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and reaching out to other writers, and hey, man, will you put up a post? You know, I mean, maybe you're not supposed to do that, talk to another writer about your book,
Mm.
but you know. So yeah, I mean, I love doing that stuff, or finding someone, uh, you know, who will take a picture with a book,
Yeah.
that I thought never would do it. You know, I mean, you know, Strawberry Alarm Clock was a band from the '60s. They had a song called "Incense and Peppermints." I'm probably dating myself. I listened to that song 1,000 times. I
Mm.
ran into them. In fact, the NAMM show, Pete, they were actually in the booth next to me for Rock Cellar, which is like this great site, bunch of great interviews. In fact, I used to do like a little column for them called Behind the Curtain.
Mm.
And if any of you have seen my Facebook page, you can see some of the stories. Anyway, Strawberry Alarm Clock was there. Anyway, I got a picture of them holding the book. You know, I mean, you know,
Uh,
just
yeah.
little things like that. So
Full circle stuff.
exactly,
Yeah. 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 So cool. So cool.
exactly.
Um,
There you go. L.
I
Scott
was,
Music remembers Incense and Peppermints. Thank you.
yeah. Lauren, he's an aficionado of all things guitar and musical. Wolf is such a great drummer. Absolutely. I mean, he's a chip up the old block. And I think, I mean, one of the most amazing things about Van Halen, I think, too, just to take note of, too, is that connection between the drums and the guitar, between Al and Ed, which was like, I sometimes say they were like one mind. And around 84, that really culminates in, I just think, Girl Gone Bad, like where it sounds like one person playing the guitar and the drums at the same time, like those licks that they're playing and the groove and everything. It's like those. We haven't had too many examples of, you know, the guitar and drums like that and an interplay between, you know, I used to play a little bit in the early 2000s with two twin brothers named Evan and Jaron that were really good songwriters, and they would sing together and it sounded like the same voice. So they harmonized. They were twins, you know, and that's what Eddie and Al, you know, Ed and Al sound like to me, is like that. It's the same. They're sharing one mind musically, and that's part of the magic of the band too. Was that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, man.
You know, I'm sorry, Pete. Yeah, so referencing Wolf here. Yeah, I think it must have been one of the last conversations I ever had with Edward. And again, I can't remember my chronology. Wolf would have been about 11, and Edward is talking about Wolf. And I think this is probably one of the first times, or maybe the first time, he actually talked about Wolf, the musician. You know, and he says, "Oh, listen to this," you know, and he puts something up. This is a phone conversation, so he must have had some kind of a little recorder, and he puts it up, you know. So I'm trying to listen, you know, through my phone, through the recorder, you know, so it comes out into that wishy-washy kind of a sound. But I'm listening to, you know, and it sounds like somebody's just laying down this very heavy groove, you know. I go, wow, that's, you know, I assumed it was Alex, you know. And he goes, yeah, that's Wolf, you know, man. I taught him how to play drums in 3 minutes, which I totally believe. And I don't know if you've gotten to that section yet, but he talks about how to, you know, Wolf, you know, just hit your foot, you know, your bass drum, and then your high, you know, your hi-hat, and your, you know, and I'm sure that Wolf did learn the drums, the rudiments in 3 minutes, you know. But you know, he plays this, you know, and he's so proud of what Wolf has done. And just backing up a little bit, one of our great conversations, sometimes we'd get kind of deep, and it wouldn't necessarily be about music. And I tended to call those conversations the Twilight Tapes. Sometimes Edward would call late at night, hence Twilight Tapes, you know, and we'd just be talking about stuff. And I think some of those conversations are really revealing about Edward. And I think it was during one of those conversations when we talk about, you know, would you like to have kids? And he goes, yeah. And this is like, I'm again, hard to remember, but sometime in the mid 80s. And he goes, yeah, you know, I said, would you like your kids to be in music? He goes, well, if they want to, you know. And I thought that was such an amazing thing for him to say, because you think he would have said, well, yeah, man, I really wanted to go into, you know, but it's like, it didn't matter to him. The fact that Wolf had all of those, his, you know, that pedigree, you know, was amazing. But, you know, Wolf could have been a financial guy, I mean, Edward would have still loved him the same way. But it was pretty
Absolutely.
amazing how he would, had that sensibility about his kids and things,
Yeah, man, and that they really were. I mean, he was just like, it's just it's he's got to carry that Van Halen torch now, and they really were like. I mean, I saw that. Anybody could see it. The two of them together, and then when he'd speak about him when Wolf wasn't around, it's just it's all heart, and and they just. What can you say? He loved him so much, and he was so proud of him, and truly, when he passed away, I mean, that must have given him some comfort to know that his son, with his record and everything, and how amazing. I mean, some of my last conversations with him, I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
But wait till you hear it. Like, it's the first album had been largely, I think, was largely complete by then.
Mm-hmm.
Album, and just he was so proud, and it's like. So anyway, it's I've got to start wrapping up because I'm going on the road and I got to get my gear ready. Somebody's going to come pick it up in a couple of hours.
Oh, nice, man.
You can see my floor right now of cables and pedal boards, and it's like it's insane in here. But just getting ready to go on tour. But I think that's actually a really nice place to leave it. Is like thinking about Wolf and like all the it's so great to see like that. We still have a Van Halen out there doing the, Burning Bright, doing the, it's fantastic. And so.
Absolutely, man. And I just wanted to just give a quick shout out to Ben Tom. Ben Tom has been a great fan. And Adam Roach, who I referenced earlier. Adam has cleaned all my audio and put stuff up on my YouTube. And he puts up with me when I can't figure out how to do something technically. And, I'll get on him to do something and he'll turn it around. So I wanted to say thank you to those guys, and thank you to everybody for all these wonderful questions and for, coming by and hanging out on a Sunday afternoon.
We got to do it again. We'll have another one of these. Let's take one more just for the heck of it, because it's here. And I think it's an interesting, Eddie says he hated doing covers in the book. Did he think they were not as good as what he had written? I mean, I think he was like, just about being creative, right? And so when he was tasked with at some point, probably around Diver Down, I think he was getting a little frustrated with this push for covers.
Yeah. And I don't think it was necessarily, Chris, that he didn't think they were as good as what he had written. I think it was just simply the fact that he had not written them. And why were you doing covers when I have enough songs to put on an album? That being said, real quickly, he played me "You're No Good," an early version of it, and I'm listening to it, and he said, "Hey man, do you know what that is?" And it's like, I knew it was a cover. I knew, obviously, and I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize it, and I think he got a little upset that I didn't recognize it, maybe, But then he told me what it was. I go, "Oh, I see how you're doing that," But anyway, so
he tells a story in the book about how he never even listened to it. He just from memory kind of
exactly.
These are kind of the changes, and they turned it into their own thing, which is so cool. Because when you think about it, I mean, we can spend time like, oh, we got to learn every note and like get really
exactly.
Part of my role as a sideman guitar player, learning things note for note. And the cool thing about being Van Halen was like, I think it goes something like this, and we'll do our own version of that song.
Exactly.
It's such a cool, dark energy on that tune. And
it really is. And then just real quickly, that cover on Diver Down, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? And he says there's a little mistake in that he does, it's like he hits a half step instead of the whole step,
Yeah.
And I mean, you might know where it is. I have to listen to it very clearly, but the fact that, he kind of goofs about that, and that's his approach to covers kind of a thing. So
it's so funny because he references it, mistakes and things reference sometimes. And I don't even, it's like he talks about the beginning of Eruption, there's a run in Eruption. Oh, there's this mistake in it, where he always, and I always wonder what, there is that very atonal, like the fast run that
I know.
And it's like, but it's so cool. It's like, I can't imagine it being any different.
Exactly. In his head, it's a mistake. In everybody else's head, it's just a beautiful little thing that happens, right?
100%. Ben Tom says, when will part 2 with Steve Rosen be? Well, we got to do that. I'm away for a couple months on tour. I'm headed out, and the Satch Vibe Band is hitting the road. So we're getting out there within the next couple of weeks to.
God, that's amazing.
On shows, but yeah, I'm it's an honor, and I'm just over the moon. I'm just working my butt off trying to get ready. So yeah.
Last question for you. Do you get nervous? I mean, not nervous, maybe that's the wrong word. Apprehensive about going up there? And
you know, I tell you what, yeah, but I was amazed. I didn't know how I was going to be in the room with those guys. So I'm always an over preparer. So I just prepared. And I didn't know I was going to be first day of rehearsal, you know? So I got in there and, you know, there's a 7-string, right? And when Steve Vai looks at you and says like, okay, so show me how you play Hydra, you know? And I had to, you know, you know, and I go, okay. I just rolled the volume up and I just looked at the neck and I went like, don't suck now. Because that was the first time he heard me play. And I did it. I did the whole part. And,
wow.
and he looked at me, he goes, okay, yeah, that's how that goes. And I was like, okay, we're good. I can carry on from here today.
Very cool, man.
That was how that went, you know, and it was a trip. I didn't know how I was going to be, but there's you know, you just prepare. And then at the end of the day, we're all musicians. And it's like, yeah, I got to turn off the fact that my 3 of my heroes in the 80s, probably the top 3, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Eddie Van Halen, you know? So now I'm doing these shows and playing these songs. And I just have to kind of remember that, hey, you've been doing this professionally for 35 years or whatever. And it's like, you just draw on all of that. It's just the same, you know, they're the 2 lead singers. I'm there to help these guys, back them up, and be of service in any way that I can. Just let's go, you know. So I'm ready. Wow. Yeah. So hope to see some guys. If anybody there watching is going to come to any of the gigs over in the UK or in Europe, we're going to have a blast. It's going to be really fun. So, but hey, I can't thank you enough. This is so much fun, and I just love the work that you did on this book. And you guys got to check it out. The link's in the video description. So go to the website and it's not just a book, because it's that, and it's so much more than that. And what I'm getting at is it's a guitar lesson. And if you're interested in Eddie Van Halen or just guitar in general, like just getting an insight, there's nothing like hearing some of these conversations and then the back and forth with you guys playing the unamplified, just coming through a little cassette. It is an education. I just love it. So thanks for bringing it to the world, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Pete.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be here today.
Hang around and I'll say bye. And, you know, don't sign off yet, but I'm going to sign off the folks here. And you guys, so next week, it's a little touch and go, but I'll see where I'm at next week. I should have no problem doing the show next week, though. I think probably around the usual time. So I'll put up a watch page and stuff. And then hopefully we can do this again, you know, get Steve back and do another.
Absolutely.
Later in the summer. Okay. Thanks so much.
See ya.